Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for this very special chat today on optimizing your performance and health through blood sugar control. I'm Varun Sriram with UCAN, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by registered dietitian, sports nutritionist, whole bunch of other things, Julie Burns, a wealth of knowledge. Julie, thanks so much for being part of this discussion today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And Julie, off the top, we are going to say we were really lucky to do this together about a week ago. We had a lot of people on live listening to this. Like sometimes happens with technology, ran into a little bit of technical issues with the recording. So we're having this conversation again. If you were able to tune in live, we really appreciate it. Hopefully the second time around, you'll hear some nuggets or find some things out that we didn't talk about the first time. And if you've been one of the people that's been eagerly awaiting this conversation, here it is. Sorry it took so long, but we're glad to be able to deliver Julie's expertise to you today. So Julie, thanks for joining us for round number 2.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And for those who were on live, I've gotten a lot of funny feedback because my dad made a live appearance. So we won't have him tonight, but thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
That's right. That's the benefits. If you do join these sessions live, you never know who's going to pop on. But Julie, let's get right into it. You've been in sports nutrition and you've worked with athletes to help optimize their performance for decades now. Tell us a little bit about your background in sports nutrition and what do you do today?
Okay. Well, I'll start by saying I'm the founder and CEO of Sport Fuel, which is my consulting practice of 8 really exceptional professionals, including integrative sports nutritionists, dietitians, nurses, health coaches, and we all work together to help our clients optimize their energy and performance. And we use a really highly customized nutrition approach, which I can get into a little bit, but we are the team nutritionist for the Chicago Blackhawks, and we've been doing that since 1988, so a long time. I've worked with a lot of other pro athletes and pro teams, including the Chicago White Sox, the Bulls and the Bears, Northwestern varsity athletes, and other elite athletes who have taught me so much. So that's my background there in terms of sports nutrition. Did you want me to talk about my education or?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and tell us a little bit about your education. Well, how are you schooled in this in sports nutrition, and what really drove your passion for sports nutrition? You know, where you decided that that's what you wanted to be educated in.
Okay, sure, I'd be happy to do that. So I started out as a chemistry major down at the University of Illinois in Champaign. My mom was actually going to college at the same time at University of Illinois in Chicago, and she took a nutrition class and she's like, Julie, I think you'd really love this. And she was right, mothers know best, and haven't really looked back. So my interest though in exercise and nutrition was really peaked when I was I did some student research under Dr. Donald Lehman's lab, Dr. David Quigg, and they were researching the effects of amino acids in exercise. So we were like running rats on a treadmill back in the day. I think it was like one of the first multi-track treadmills there. And then I was given a book by the Nancy Clark, who wrote the Athlete's Kitchen. I know she's still practicing. So she had done her training at Mass General. So I'm like, oh, I think I'll do that too. So I did my internship out east at Mass General, and did my master's and worked in the research center there where I learned a lot, and which really set me up. I was really lucky. Moved back to Chicago, which is where I'm from, and worked in clinical research testing pharmaceuticals and nutritionals in cardiovascular research. So some of the statins, before they were first approved, lovastatin, such several fish oil studies, vitamin E, oat bran study. And I really was always talking about sports nutrition too, in addition to doing that research. So I was lucky to be called by Dr. Davidson, whom I worked for, was called by Chicago Blackhawks asking for a sports nutritionist. So I was in the right place at the right time, and I was fortunate enough to have Mike Gapsky, who's still the head trainer with Chicago Blackhawks, who's very interested in optimizing performance and health with nutrition. And you know, we've been working together ever since, and learning obviously a lot since, you know, the diet recommendations have changed over the years, and lots has changed over the years. So
yeah, and we want to get into that. And what's interesting, Julie, is, you know, working with the Chicago Blackhawks and the elite athletes that you have, I mean, there's been a lot of success in your time there, Stanley Cup championships, but you also work with everyday folks, you know, CEOs, busy executives, just regular people who want to train for a marathon, perhaps. And a lot of those folks are the people that are going to be listening to this, just kind of taking a step back, like
Mhm.
in your experience, how has working with people that are at the pinnacle of fitness or performance helped you, or has it helped you translate things to the everyday individual who still might have big performance goals, but obviously isn't doing it at the same level?
Right. Well, definitely they've been my greatest teachers. All the athletes that I've worked with, the patients actually at the research center have, were telling me, Julie, when I'm eating the type of foods that I was recommending, that recall this is back in the 80s with the high carbohydrate, low fat, disregard, have as much vegetable oil, soybean oil, canola oil, all that stuff, which we know now really has an adverse effect on metabolism. So I learned a lot from listening to the athletes that I have worked with. And just to answer the question you started with in terms of other regular people, everybody wants to be their best. And, nutrition is really, really powerful. Everyone wants to optimize their performance, optimize their health. And what's just really, really powerful is that we can do that using food, using the right food and fuel and training. So it doesn't really matter if you're, an athlete in the boardroom or, out on the field or the ice or, on the track. Everyone can be their best once they realized what is the best fuel for me and what is the best lifestyle. And we can talk a little bit more about that too.
You touched on this evolution in fueling, and I think it's been so interesting, over the past perhaps several years, at least for me in the past decade working for UCAN, where I've really been attuned to this kind of this perhaps shift in beliefs and kind of normal conventions about what athletes need. And you alluded to it with, the high carbohydrate, low fat intake. What were some of the principles that you were schooled upon in terms of fueling for exercise that maybe feel outdated to you now, or perhaps that you no longer believe in?
Sure. Well, believe it or not, it's still going on now. I would like to think that the paradigm shift has occurred with 88% of Americans having problems with their metabolism, insulin resistance, inflammatory conditions. But believe it or not, a lot of the information that I was told that I was taught that is outdated is still being taught. So UCAN is a unique company, and there's many more of us that have figured it out and have relied upon the research that is very plentiful there to show that the diet that was recommended in the 80s is really not good for performance or for health and in general. So just to answer your question in terms of what was I schooled in, tons of carbohydrates for every athlete without any regard really to the type of the sport, their digestion issues, their training schedule, their own glucose tolerance, body composition, genetics even. We do a lot of epigenetic, we do genetic testing now, so we can really customize the diet. But, back in the 80s, I actually was eating that same high carbohydrate diet and having lots of problems and not attributing it to my diet. And I know we can get into this a little bit later, but I have 27-year-old triplets now. So when I had a lot of trouble getting pregnant, and in terms of the diet that I was eating was definitely contributing to that. So we didn't know back then the inflammatory effect, the metabolic damage that we were causing by eating that way, and now we do. So I think it's really important that everybody knows that you can change what you eat, you can eat real foods, you can dial in, get your metabolic health dialed in, and great things happen as far as your performance, your body composition, your digestion. You can really step into your own power, and that's what really gets me passionate. It's like, you don't have to have those up and downs with your energy. You can keep it just smooth sailing, and one size doesn't fit all. It's going to be different for each person, but there's going to be some general principles in terms of using real whole foods and real high quality carbohydrates, and then certainly, we use UCAN, and we can talk about that too in terms of the fueling.
So for you, like this evolution that you're talking about in fueling and kind of shifting away from this high carbohydrate kind of fast carbs all the time approach, you talked about your personal experience with that. Was there any, I'm sure there were experiences with athletes, so I'd love to have you share like some of the kind of things athletes were experiencing that made you question this. And then just more broadly for you, was there like an aha moment, or was it more just like a gradual, as you're hearing more athlete experiences, as you're perhaps getting exposed to more research, having your own personal experiences, it's all just kind of coming together over time to help you shift some of the thinking?
Yeah, so I would say that I had an inkling pretty early on, even when I was working at the Cardiovascular Research Center. I had an athlete who really was having some trouble with focus and sweating and such, losing his concentration during the game. And he was acting like he was hypoglycemic, low blood sugar. And I'm thinking, well, what's going on there? And so we actually had him come in and do a glucose tolerance test. And sure enough, he was a reactive hypoglycemic. And we changed his diet, gave him some more high quality protein, probably gave him the wrong fats at that time, I must say, because I wasn't schooled like I am now. But we significantly reduced the simple carbohydrates and changed the timing of when he was eating. So, and he had basically just, he couldn't believe how much better he felt. I mean, all his symptoms went away. So I was kind of like, wow, something's not right here. And then I also had the cardiovascular clients who would, I'd be recommending, the bagels, now I'm recommending beets, right? But, those were okay for people. People weren't worried about reducing as much about their processed carbohydrates. And they'd be like, Julie, I gained, 4 pounds when I had that. And I would be like, really? So that made me think it's not only the carbohydrate that's fueling it, but the type of carbohydrate. And then also it made me realize in terms of just how important the immune system and the digestive system is. Because that's kind of ground zero. And so people can be eating the wrong amount of foods. They can be eating too much at the wrong time. They can be eating the wrong types of foods, and they're going to have different reactions in terms of their inflammatory response. So that was a big aha moment. I learned about Weston Price, who is all about, he studied the world looking at all the different types of diets that people are on. And he said, people eat a bunch of different types of foods, but what's the one thing that they don't do? They don't have processed foods. When things start going really bad is when they start introducing processed foods. So when I learned about Weston Price and about, all the effects of this typical American diet, I mean, I pretty much cried. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been giving people the wrong information. I've been giving athletes, myself, my family. So, but it was really good. I'm really grateful that I had that experience, because it's made me a lot healthier than I was in than my 20s, but it's also allowed me to help people, as I said, like, can step into their power, be the best that they can be. And it's not that hard, that we can all do it. It's all in our power.
And one of the big benefits in terms of this shifting pattern, or not pattern, excuse me, the shifting paradigm of how you feel yourself is controlling your blood sugar. Now you've alluded to it a few different times and talked about even the symptoms of low blood sugar when you were describing some of what the athlete you were working through was going through. But kind of in layman's terms for our audience, what is blood sugar? Like, when they hear us talking about blood sugar, how should they think about that? How should they kind of equate that to their own performance?
I just think I always just explain it like it's just energy. It's just fuel, and it's what our muscles are reliant on it. Our brain, our organs are reliant on blood sugar, on energy. So we need a steady supply of fuel to fuel all performance, all body systems. So I would say the most important thing that anyone can do is to eat in a way that controls your blood sugar, that keeps it steady. And that's what we do. We use real foods to do that. And you'll have some people that'll need a little bit more protein, more fat, less carb. We really work with athletes to help them find their carbohydrate sweet spot, because it's going to be different for everybody. A lot has to do with your stress level, your microbiome, your genetics. There's lots of things that go into the equation, but your choices will affect your performance in a huge way, and your health. And so that's really powerful. It's like, you don't have to keep slamming all that quick carbohydrate because you're an athlete. I mean, and you don't have to destroy your body composition to do that. You can have a slow, steady release of fuel to fuel your sport and to ensure that you're really metabolically healthy. And that's awesome, right?
It's amazing, right? And for athletes that you've taken through the shift, Julie, because it sounds like obviously you have taken athletes from perhaps fueling one way to shifting the way they think about nutrition. Like what are they communicating to you in terms of what they feel, whether it's from a performance standpoint, from a recovery, from a focus standpoint, some of the things you've touched on, like what is the byproduct of making the shift in terms of some of the things that people might expect to feel when they're going out there being active?
In terms of their blood sugar, once they control their blood
Yeah,
sugar.
once they control their blood
Yeah.
sugar. Exactly.
Yeah. So, basically they're not going to have to be thinking about their fuel, because you need to think about, you want to just be in your zone. You want to be, doing your training, doing your sport. So the focus is going to be amazing. They're going to be totally dialed in, right? They're not going to have the crash and burn that a lot of athletes have. They're not going to have digestive issues. They're going to recover better because everything that you do in terms of keeping that blood sugar steady, that's going to control a hormone called insulin. So, you're going to be less inflamed. You're not going to store fat. I mean, body composition is a biggie. I can't tell you how many really elite athletes would tell me, like, Julie, when I eat that food that you're telling me to eat, I'm getting fat. I'm getting, fat around the middle. And I'm like, this is, not good. So when we made those changes, their body composition naturally, they leaned out. The other thing we do is we make sure that they're not eating foods that they're sensitive to, because believe it or not, that can have an effect on your blood sugar too. Sleep is something else that's really important. So if you have really good metabolic health, you're going to sleep well. And we really focus on sleep because if you don't sleep well, your blood sugar is going to be adversely affected. And, we had actually Margaret, who's one of our nurses and health coach, wore a CGM recently, and it was just, mind-boggling in terms of helping her learn which foods affect her blood sugar, but also how stress and sleep and all those other things go into the puzzle too. So,
I mean, you just listed out a number of really compelling benefits, right? Just to kind of quickly review for people controlling their blood sugar, you talked about not crashing and burning, so better energy. You talked about focus. You talked about by controlling insulin, reducing inflammation. You talked about digestion, not having to fuel as frequently and perhaps mess with your stomach or put things in your stomach that might, mess with it while you're exercising.
Right.
So and I probably missed one or two other things you mentioned, but it's really, really compelling, right? It's like super, it's almost touching everything that an athlete or somebody active is looking to optimize.
Right. And I guess I would throw in a few others that I just thought of, like in terms of skin health and then fertility. I mentioned to you that I had trouble getting pregnant, and I know it was, based on my diet and stress. I was working way too much, right? I mean, that's the elephant in the room. But I would also add, in terms of athletes, we want to be, anabolic, right? We want to be in the build up mode. And in terms of your hormones, so guys want to have their testosterone optimized. Women want to have all their, their estrogen, progesterone. We all have various hormones in different ratios, males versus females. But once you get your blood sugar under control, your hormones will be optimized too. So not only your fertility, but like overall sexual health, which is a big deal, and vitality. Like, who doesn't want to feel really vital? So I would say that balancing your blood sugar, getting that steady, that's another really big benefit of that.
So that's an amazing bridge kind of into our next phase of this discussion, Julie, which is really about how to optimize blood sugar. And let's hit on what you just were talking about, which is reducing stress. Maybe you can give us a little bit more on how stress correlates to blood sugar. And, stress is everywhere these days. There's so many stressors around all of us. I'm sure
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to just have you comment on if you've seen like an exacerbation in stress with people you work with since COVID, but hopefully things getting a little bit back to normal will make us all a little bit de-stressed. But I'm going to ask you a bunch of stuff there, but maybe starting with, how does stress correlate to blood sugar?
Right. So the stress correlates to blood sugar because of the hormones that are released with the adrenaline and such. So, extremely important in terms of managing stress. And sometimes you get stressed out about managing stress, and that makes it worse, right? You don't want that. And just a little bit of an aside, we do this testing, nutrigenomics testing now, and I can actually see how someone will respond to stress. Like, they're going to have a harder time maybe breaking down their stress hormones, and what other lifestyle things are they going to have to do to ensure, that they don't have this adverse effect on their performance, due to stress. So I have seen a lot of stress with COVID. I think it's been stressful to be Zooming all the time. We don't have our community. But I've seen some other really good things, that have happened during this time, that people are talking about it, which I think is a really good thing, right? So in terms of your blood sugar, I would say stress is number one in terms of modulating stress, because it affects all your other, it drives your chemistry, right? So if you don't address the stress and figure out how to modulate that, your diet's not going to work as well. Your blood sugar is going to be going up and down, even if you're eating the perfect diet, which, I've worked with a lot of athletes over the years who were super dialed in, sometimes too dialed in terms of their diet. Maybe they went to the other extreme on occasion, and that's not good. So we definitely, with our athletes and all people that we work with, we talk about it. We address it right away. Like, what are your stressors? What are you doing in terms of your sleep hygiene? Are you on your screens? What are some stressors that you control? And certainly looking at blood sugar is one, but breath work is really important. We have there's tools that you can use yourself without needing anyone else, like the box breathing that the Navy SEALs use. I mean, you can just Google that online, but everyone needs to have coping strategies to modulate their stress, being out in nature, all the things that we know, but you have to prioritize those, because when you don't, bad things happen. You're not going to optimize your performance and your health. So we talk to them about breathing, about sleep, but also I had mentioned to you in the first go round about YouCan, which is a neuroacoustic system that used to just be available for a very, a big ticket price, but now you can get a monthly subscription. And basically what it does is it takes you out of your fight or flight, kind of your performance, which most people are, we're stuck in that all day long, and it puts you into recovery. And so you put some headphones on, a little neuroacoustic music, and it's very complex, and it's the only patented program that's out there. And then you have a little disc that's your relaxation. It's GABA, which kind of puts the brake on stress. So we use things like that in addition to, breathing and getting the diet all dialed in, because it drives your chemistry, and there's no way around it. And then we do supplements too. We use a lot of herbs to modulate the stress. Make sure we know someone's caffeine tolerance, because maybe that's, having if you're a poor metabolizer of caffeine, that can adversely affect your blood sugar, and you can have some issues there. So we definitely try to, customize the diet and the supplementation too.
It's so fascinating because, there's so many elements of stress, like, personal stress or work stress or family stress that you might not be able to control, but you just provided so many kind of examples and some specific strategies on some of the coping mechanisms, right? So if stress is inevitable in certain instances, let's figure out how to deal with it. In other instances, perhaps like sleep or the screen hygiene that you were talking about, let's actually take steps to eliminate the stress. But it's nice to know that there's, it'd be great if we could all live our lives with no sources of stress, but it's nice to know that you guys have factors to say stress is going to come up. Here's what you can do in those stressful situations to cope with it.
Absolutely. Like, expect it. You can't control anything, but you do need to have those coping strategies. And if you have steady blood sugar, you're going to be less reactive. So you're going to be able to respond to stress better, right? But there are those other things that you can't ignore. And so I think that that's a really big piece of the puzzle with the breathing and the other tools that you can use. 100%.
Let's shift to another element of blood sugar optimization, which is really fueling around the workouts, and that's an area where a lot of athletes, as you've taken us through at the start of this discussion, that's where a lot of athletes can get in trouble, relying on, the fast carbs, the sugars, both pre, post, and during workouts to an excessive nature. And with UCAN, we've kind of alluded to it a couple of times, but UCAN, it's completely different. It's a carbohydrate-based product, but it's providing you with a very slow and even release of carbohydrate rather than this quick burst. So for you, Julie, how did UCAN come across your radar? What intrigued you about it, or how did you even hear about it?
I was trying to remember. I'm almost sure it was either Charles Poliquin or Jim LaValle, Dr. Jim LaValle, or both. But I do remember when I first learned about UCAN, I thought it was too good to be true. I'm like, wait a second, because I've been worried about giving, the athletes and family and everyone else all this high carbohydrate food, because I knew, as I learned, the effect on the metabolism and inflammatory processes, and it's like I set them up for chronic disease. I mean, I was really troubled by that. And so when I heard this, I was like, wait a second, how is that possible that you could fuel your sport without damaging your metabolism? Because here I'm looking at this label and it's like 15 to 20 grams of carb. There's no protein. Well, now you guys have a protein thing, but there was no protein in it, the super starch, no fiber. And yet it's not spiking insulin. So, and I know there's like a patent on the way it's cooked or something, and it's a non-GMO corn. So, that's basically how I learned about it. And I was just, very relieved that, not only could, the athlete benefit from this in terms of the slow, steady, release of energy, but the long-term effects, right, for their health wouldn't be an issue. So that was great news for me.
Where do you find it's most with different people you work with, and maybe it's different for different people based on their goals, but like, how do you recommend people use UCAN when you're suggesting to athletes they incorporate it into their plan? What are you looking for in terms of figuring out where it's most relevant?
Yeah, so it really depends. We actually do a fueling program for athletes and anyone who wants to work with us, because we really, what you fuel with and when you fuel with, the meal timing and fueling is really important. So, from a perspective of when, we generally would recommend it pre-workout, right? 30 to 45 minutes before the workout. So that you're getting that slow and steady release of glucose throughout the workout. And then if you need to refuel, so it depends on your sport, right? After an hour or so, you might want to refuel. So that's when we would be using it mostly. We also use it for recovery, because something else, that science has shown is we don't need, huge amounts of carbohydrate and protein post workout, and actually can have some detrimental effects. So you want to have the right type of carbohydrate and some protein post workout. So we also use it in the post workout period. I would say I've also used it for people who are having trouble sleeping, because sometimes you're having trouble sleeping because your blood sugar is dropping, your cortisol is going up, your blood cortisol go down, and then your blood sugar drops, and then your cortisol goes up. So that will wake you up and you're like, 2 a.m, you're ready for prime time. So sometimes we will use UCAN at bed too, to keep that slow and steady fuel source during sleep. And that's helped quite a few people. It's also helped people lose weight and optimize their body composition.
It's awesome. Really valuable to hear, how somebody that works with such high level folks is incorporating UCAN into the plan. And I'll just show everybody on the screen, if you aren't familiar with it, this one right here, the YouCan Energy. This is, let's see if I click my blurred background. Yeah. Well,
yeah, it's a little blurred.
So great. There we go. So that's the UCAN Energy, which is based on the super starch. We've also, Julie, you'll be getting your hands on some of these here really soon. We've got UCAN Edge, which is our brand new product, which is also based on super starch, but just in a little pouch that you can squeeze and just suck down right before.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. That's on the market now, right?
It's on the market now. Yeah. Just launched a week ago.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. And I know for runners and cyclists and even, the court sports too, it's just convenient. It's already mixed. So I'm excited to try that too. And is that a flavor? What flavor is that?
That's an orange flavor right now. We've got one flavor with orange, and we should have a couple other flavors coming pretty soon. This thing has been flying, which has been great, because a lot of people, it's interesting. It's a society based on convenience, but a lot of the quick and convenient things people are going to grab when it comes to workout fuel don't support blood sugar stabilization. Like you've been talking about, right? They're going to grab a sugar gel or a granola bar or something like that that's not going to set them up metabolically for success. So this having something that supports metabolism and blood sugar stabilization, like you've been detailing to us, but it's also quick and convenient. We're really excited about
Right.
that.
Right. So the timing, yeah. So something you just mentioned in terms of the granola bar, I mean, you would definitely not want to have a granola bar and one of those quick sugary drinks, especially like 20 to 30 minutes before you train. I have seen time and time again where the athletes will do that and then their blood sugar will drop and they'll have those symptoms. So definitely want to stay away from those quick sugars. Pre-nutrition, the closer you get to exercise, if you're going to start training, then obviously the hormones shift and lots of other things happen during exercise. But that's wonderful. I can't wait to try it.
And Julie, before we move on to kind of the final piece of our discussion today, if not UCAN, what from a food perspective would you suggest going into a workout that would support the same principles as that we were talking about with UCAN, a steady release of energy, not a quick spike, something that's going to keep athletes really even throughout their workout?
Right. Well, thanks for that question because, obviously I'm all about real food, right? So we do try to, whenever possible, use food instead of, supplements for fueling, but sometimes that's not possible. So I guess to answer your question, it depends on when you're training. Because if you haven't allowed enough time, and that's what I see a lot, especially for people who are either they don't want to get up early enough to eat a breakfast, and then they'll have something in their stomach because you have to give your digestive system time to process that, right? Or at the end of a work day, they're hungry, but then they don't have enough time. They have in order to eat something and allow for that digestion. So, a good rule of thumb in terms of keeping the blood sugar steady, obviously, is not having the quick processed foods, right? I mean, that kind of goes without saying. So we would have you prioritize some protein there. So, sometimes I have like a turkey jerky sticks, from the farmer, something like that, along with some healthy fat. So you could have some olives if that was your thing, maybe a handful of berries. I mean, an apple with peanut butter, and almond butter. I mean, it really just depends. But it depends. You have to really figure out how close you are to your training. So the more you eat, the hungrier you are, the more you're going to want to eat and the further away you have to be from your meal. So, we focus on low glycemic foods, index foods, the fruits like your berries. We really like to push, if the person's willing to do that, the starchy, getting your carbohydrate from starchy vegetables like your butternut squash and carrots and such, instead of too many grains. Again, some people do fine on grains. We tend to be the gluten-free grains because we're always worried about, keeping people's gut healthy and in tip-top shape. But we have seen, especially for people who might be carrying a little bit of weight around the middle and do have some insulin resistance going, that those even some of the whole grains that are healthy for you might have an effect on your blood sugar. So I really think, if at all possible, to try to see how you feel. How do you feel if you can't, afford or have access to a continuous glucose monitor to really, see in real time how that food's affecting you? Think about, how's it making me feel? Am I focused? Am I energetic? Am I getting a little bit of shaky? Am I running out of energy? And you do that, keep your blood sugar steady by having, some protein, some healthy fats, and some real food carbs. That's as simple as it gets. And it's really not that hard. And I actually put together some recipes for you guys that we'll share to give people an idea of really what that looks like. Certainly it'll be different for everybody, right? But it's using real food, and it's a nice balance, and not overly high in carbohydrate, and you can play around with that till you find your sweet spot, as I mentioned before.
Perfect. And yeah, Julie, like you mentioned, those recipes, we will email those out to people, and those will be available on the Sport Fuel website as well.
Yep.
You took us into the sort of the final topic of our discussion, which was daily nutrition, and just outline a lot of the principles that people should follow, gave examples of specific foods in terms of controlling your blood sugar day to day. I just want to ask you one more question on that. In terms of a good breakfast, I think like the breakfast foods innately make it so hard for a lot of people to start the day controlling blood sugar, right? When you talked about like your bagels or kind of your simple carbohydrates like your breads or croissants or pastries. I mean, you could get in trouble if you're not mindful of how you start the day. So any examples of what you would consider to be a good breakfast for blood sugar control? And is there any premium to sort of starting the day with controlled blood sugar? Like, does it in any way make things easier as the day goes on to be compliant and follow a good daily nutrition plan?
Absolutely. I mean, you can set yourself up for having a really great day with great energy or not so much. So if you spike your insulin, with the bagel and, orange juice and, back in the day, the Special K with skim milk and orange juice, whatever, you're going to set yourself up in terms of your hormones and your energy for a roller coaster the rest of the day. So that is probably one of the most important things you can do. I mean, ideally what we do is we suggest that you try to get around 20 grams of protein in the morning, good quality protein. We're all about, when possible and feasible financially to, organic and pastured and thinking about what your animal ate, right? So some pastured eggs would be great with some veggies there, some low glycemic berries, some raspberries, a half avocado. That's kind of simple, but you also can do like a turkey hash, ground turkey with lots of green vegetables, and then put some butternut squash in there, avocado oil, olive oil. Sometimes you don't have time to eat that though, so that's why I was trying to focus on the timing of the meal. There's quick and easy things that you can grab. I have these little egg bites. You could have that with a half avocado and again some berries. If you don't want to get fancy, you don't want to cook, but we do have lots of recipes, and we even have smoothies where we use blueberries, and we'll use cauliflower in there, and we'll use spinach, and, throwing all those real foods, and, unsweetened coconut milk, and maybe some chia seeds. So, real foods that are not going to have a huge hit on your blood sugar, but that are going to fuel you and also give you adequate protein too. So we'd probably put some, we might use some beef peptides, we might use some collagen. It just really depends on the person, what's best for them, and then how it makes them feel. And you always have to ask yourself, how's it making me feel, right? How's it working for me? Not how does it work for you, Julie? How's it working for me?
Definitely. And with a lot of those smoothies you mentioned too, we found that to be a great way for a lot of people to kind of combine the nutrients they want from real food with the blood sugar stabilizing power of super starch. So if you're throwing your cauliflower and your spinach and your peptides in with your UCAN energy plus protein, perhaps, then
exactly.
in some cases, right, you could really get the best of all worlds.
Yeah, and to that end, if you are at the end of your day, or you don't want to get up early, that's when, and you don't have time in terms of letting for digestion, that's when you can with the protein or with the super starch, depending on, are you trying to continue your fast? It really depends on the person, right? It is appropriate, and it's great because you don't necessarily want to do your workout in a fasted state, depending on your goals. Some people might want to do that, but if you want to have that slow, steady fuel, and it won't affect your insulin, it's not going to do anything to your metabolism, it's just going to give you good fuel, that's a perfect time to use it.
Perfect. Well, Julie, this has been an incredible sort of just journey through a whole bunch of different topics. We crammed a ton of info in to about 40 minutes here. Before we get out of here, we've had a bunch of questions that were submitted from our viewers. Let's go quick hit and tackle a few of these questions, if you don't mind. You game for that?
Okay, sure.
Awesome. So let's start. We were talking about UCAN, so let's start kind of with the continuation of that conversation. We had a question about doing workouts in the morning prior to breakfast. Is it better to drink UCAN with protein? Is it better to drink UCAN when you first wake up or in the evening prior to going to bed? Is there ever a situation where you'd suggest to somebody drink UCAN the night before and then fast in the morning prior to your workout? Or are you primarily suggesting people use UCAN closer to their workout?
Well, Again, it depends on their goals, right? And we didn't really talk too much about fasting. We are big proponents of time restricted eating. So making sure that you're not like eating too much all day long and eating too late. So we didn't really cover that, but that's a really important part, whether you're an athlete or an athlete in the boardroom, and anyone who wants to optimize their performance. You have to not be eating, 24/7. You have to have at least a probably 13-hour window of no eating at all to clean things up and make sure that you're, breaking down and recycling all those cells that need to, get rejuvenated. That's for recovery. So in terms of your question, would I ever have it? I generally, we use 30 to 45 minutes before planned training. So I would recommend that in general, they use it when they wake up. So if there's something else going on in terms of that person, that's not always, I never say always or never say never. But generally the night before, I would be using it more for sleep. And possibly for recovery. Again, it depends on when the athlete's training, when they're competing, lots of different factors that go in there. The other
That's a
thing,
great distinction though. Like that's a great distinction, what you just said. If it's for workout fuel, you probably want to use it in the morning. If there's another purpose, recovery,
right.
sleep, then it could make sense to use it in
Yeah.
the evening. So that alone is a good distinction.
You want it when you want it, right? And then the other thing would be really, I think I alluded to it a little bit, but in terms of like what type of sport you're doing. I mean, are you going to just be hopping on your bicycle, you're cycling or whatever, and you're not too worried about your stomach, things jostling around, or are you running, and so maybe you're taking a smaller amount, maybe without the protein there and with the super starch. And then we also really like UCAN Hydrate for electrolytes. So again, it depends on your sport, depends on, your goals and lots of other things that go into that. But generally you would want it, you want the fuel when you're training, right? You don't want it when you want it when you're sleeping too. You want to keep that steady, but,
Right.
but as a rule, you want it when you're training.
Perfect. And you talked a little bit in the context of that question about fasting. We had another question: is fasting good for
Oh,
athletes?
sorry. Okay.
No, it's all good. So what you had mentioned there, I just wanted to kind of take this one step further. You talked about fasting for athletes, kind of that 13-hour fast that you kind of recommend, that 13-hour period without eating for almost everybody to clean things up. Are there ever situations where you'd recommend athletes fast longer than 13 hours, a full day fast, or potentially, even longer?
Well, in season, that'd be pretty tough, right?
Right.
So, when I said 13 hours, I believe that the current research is saying that's probably your minimum. Now, maybe it's 12 hours, especially as you get older. There's always things that go into the mix there. But there's some people that have a 6-hour window, that have an 8-hour window, and they do really well with that. What's important is that you have a window so that
Right.
you can do that repair. You can do that repair for all your organs, and it's going to aid your recovery. So in terms of fasting, we use a fasting mimicking diet at Sport Fuel with some of our athletes in the off season to really go at clean up and kind of give it a reboot. There are lots of different ways, to fast. We tend to like the fasting mimicking diet because it retains your lean mass. And as we know, like that's gold, right? We don't want to lose even an ounce of our lean mass. So when you do the water fasting and some of the other fasting, you may be losing lean mass. And I know that based on the research, you don't lose the lean mass with the fasting mimicking diet. So we do a 5-day, program with that. And we do that with not just athletes. We're actually just started one today. We have every month we run fasting mimicking group programs. So if anybody's interested in that, they can feel free to check in with us about that.
Excellent. And without going too much deeper down, do men and women have to think about fasting differently when you guys have this program? Do you prescribe it differently, or is there anything different you kind of recommend for men versus women?
Yeah, I would say that there's some really interesting research in terms of the hormonal effects, even for cycling women, in terms of what they should be eating and certain foods that they should be eating at certain parts of their cycle. I would say that in general, men tend to do better. I think probably because of their hormones. When they're fasting, they always lose more weight. They seem to get it dialed in a little bit easier in terms of the body count. But when you think about it, women, that's for fertility reasons. It's evolution. We're trying to, hold on and to the body fat. So there's different ways that people respond to fasting, male and female for sure. And then also lots of variabilities in terms of the individual, especially what's going on with their microbiome, their stress level, their diet. Like we have learned that before we put anyone in a fasting mimicking diet program, we have to see what they're doing as their habitual diet now, because if they're eating, kind of a typical American diet where their blood sugar is up and down, we need to do some work to stabilize that first so they do well, better. And then we need to look at a bunch of nutrients, because we have seen a lot time and time again that oftentimes they're low in chromium, magnesium, vitamin D, and all those will have an effect on the blood sugar. So lots of differences between the sexes, between people, but no one is exempt from a time restricted eating window, at all, and any humans, as far as I know. I guess babies, right? Infants, maybe.
Right. That's a great. I mean, that's such a great sort of range of information you just provided to a really complex topic. So no, appreciate that, Julie. Super interesting to hear both how you approach fasting and some of, like you said, we could do a whole webinar on fasting, and I'm sure the differences between men and women and the protocol to follow. But that's a great tip of the iceberg intro for a lot of people. The last one I'm going to ask you before we close this out is, what would you say to those athletes who don't believe that nutrition plays a huge part in performance? I know what I'd say. I'd say listen to the last 45 minutes, but what would you say?
I've had plenty of those athletes, although over the years, I mean, they used to see me come in and run, but I wasn't giving the right information then. And there was a lot of the research wasn't there. The paradigm shift about metabolic health, I mean, wasn't there. So I would say that as the truth gets out about the power of real food, that's obviously changing. And I would say to those athletes that you are missing out on utilizing one of the most powerful tools you have to regulate your metabolism. I mean, we know that we use food to regulate our energy, our sleep, our weight, our appetite, and combining nutrition and lifestyle with each person's, unique genetic blueprint, it's going to revolutionize sports performance as far as I'm concerned. So getting metabolically fit by eating the foods that don't push you towards inflammation and chronic illness, and optimize your performance, combining that with fueling right with the right sports, supplements. I mean, it's super powerful. So I would say, I hope they're not on my team.
And I think, I was going to say, I think if they are on your team, they probably shift their attitudes pretty quickly. So you probably don't have too many of those.
Well, you got to meet people where they're at, and sometimes I'm too much, they're like, oh my gosh, she wants me to do all these things, but we start with the blood sugar. We start with what can you do? Maybe you start with one meal, like we talked about the breakfast, maybe I'm eating the wrong food. I think it's healthy for me because it's, I've heard it's healthy for me, but it's not the right diet, the right foods rather, to keep your blood sugar steady and to make sure you're metabolically fit. So we start wherever we're at, and do all that good stress management stuff, and start with the blood sugar, and good things happen. The body never makes a mistake.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate all the knowledge you were able to bring to us today, Julie. And it's just been so fascinating to hear your experience working with athletes, kind of how your thinking has evolved, what you communicate to athletes. So I hope everybody who's tuned to this, appreciates Julie's expertise. I know I did. Learned a lot from both of our discussions on this topic, and we hit on some different things this time. For folks, certainly you guys can listen to this and absorb everything that Julie had to say. But Julie, people can get more involved with you if they are interested in really dialing this in, right? So how can people work with you guys at Sport Fuel? What kind of services do you offer for the people in the audience that really want to take this to the next level?
Oh, well, thanks for asking about that. So during COVID, we finally got active in social media. I've been putting that up for a very long time. So finally didn't have any more excuses. So you can reach us on our Instagram. We just started that not too long ago. And that is at Sport Fuel, SPORT, F as in Frank, UEL. Shy, CHI, which stands for Chicago. That's our Instagram and Twitter. And then we also have our website is sportfuel.com. And a lot of times people put an S on that, but there's no S. So it's just sport, SPORTFUEL.com. And our info at Sport Fuel will find us. And Yeah, we really appreciate you reaching out because we're really excited about getting this information out to everybody in terms of just how powerful, food and lifestyle can be for performance and for your overall health.
Well, it's definitely great, Julie, to have folks like you kind of pushing things forward in performance. I know a lot of times when things in whatever industries there are have been done a certain way for years and years, creating change is difficult, but super cool to see what you're doing. We really appreciate it. Thanks again for all the knowledge you brought to our community. I know they're appreciative of it as well. So to everybody out there, this is the first step in the road to better fueling. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Julie, thanks so much for taking time to do this.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.